In the heart of the bustling city, where towering skyscrapers loomed as symbols of power and privilege, an ordinary woman prepared for an extraordinary fight. Eleanor Daniels, a black woman in her 40s, stood resolutely on the courthouse steps. The flashes of cameras were relentless, capturing every nuance of her expression. For Eleanor, this moment wasn't just a legal battle, it was a reckoning. The case had captured national attention, igniting debates about justice, power, and privilege. Eleanor wasn't just fighting for herself. She represented countless others who had been silenced, dismissed, or exploited by those at the top. Her opponent was none other than Jonathan Kirkwood, a billionaire whose wealth spanned industries, from tech to real estate. His influence reached the highest corridors of power, and his legal team was notorious for obliterating opposition with ruthless efficiency. But Eleanor wasn't afraid. Or, at least, she refused to show it. Clad in a simple black suit, she exuded a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with the opulence of Kirkwood's entourage. She had spent years building this case, gathering evidence, and preparing for the fight of her life. The stakes were colossal. If she lost, she risked financial ruin and public disgrace. But if she won, her victory would resonate far beyond the courtroom, challenging the very structures that allowed billionaires like Kirkwood to thrive unchecked. The case itself was rooted in a scandal that exposed the darker side of corporate America. Eleanor had once been an employee at one of Kirkwood's companies, an ambitious professional who believed in the promise of hard work. But her optimism was shattered when she discovered a web of corruption. Environmental violations, unethical labor practices, and embezzlement that lined the pockets of the elite while devastating communities. When she reported these practices to her superiors, she was ignored. When she went public, she was fired, blacklisted, and subjected to a smear campaign that left her reputation in tatters. But Eleanor refused to be silenced. Armed with damning evidence, she filed a lawsuit against Kirkwood, accusing him of orchestrating the corruption and retaliating against her for exposing it. The billionaire dismissed her claims as baseless, calling her a disgruntled former employee looking for a payday. His legal team spared no expense in trying to have the case thrown out, but Eleanor persisted, and now, against all odds, the trial was set to begin. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The air buzzed with anticipation as lawyers, journalists, and onlookers filled the gallery. All eyes were on Judge Richard Sterling, a seasoned jurist with a reputation for impartiality and a hint of unpredictability. A white man in his 60s, Sterling had presided over some of the most high-profile cases in recent history. While he was known for his adherence to the law, his rulings often carried a streak of unexpected humanity. For Eleanor, Sterling's presence was both a source of hope and uncertainty. Would he be swayed by Kirkwood's power and influence, or would he see the truth in her claims? The media frenzy surrounding the case was unprecedented. Headlines screamed with sensationalism: David versus Goliath, whistleblower takes on billionaire, and justice on trial. Can a black woman bring down a corporate giant? On social media, the case had sparked heated debates about race, gender, and class. Supporters rallied around Eleanor, calling her a hero for standing up to systemic injustice. Critics, however, dismissed her as opportunistic, questioning her motives and the timing of her accusations. For Eleanor, the noise was both empowering and overwhelming. She had spent sleepless nights poring over documents, preparing for cross-examinations, and reliving the trauma of her experiences. She knew the odds were against her. Kirkwood's legal team was relentless, armed with resources that seemed limitless. But Eleanor had something they didn't: the truth. As the trial commenced, Eleanor's lead attorney, Maria Hernandez, delivered a powerful opening statement. "This case is not just about one woman seeking justice," Maria declared, her voice steady and resolute. "It's about accountability. It's about showing that no one, not even a billionaire, is above the law." Her words resonated in the courtroom, setting the stage for what would become a battle not just of legal arguments, but of ideals. On the opposing side, Kirkwood's lead attorney exuded confidence, painting Eleanor as a disgruntled employee with no real evidence. His tone dripped with condescension, dismissing her claims as baseless and opportunistic. This is nothing more than a fabricated tale designed to tarnish the reputation of a respected businessman, he proclaimed. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, the audience divided in their perceptions of the unfolding drama. But Eleanor remained undeterred. As the first day of the trial came to a close, she stepped out of the courthouse to a sea of reporters shouting questions. She paused, meeting their gazes with quiet determination. "This isn't just my fight," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's for everyone who's ever been told they're powerless against the system. I'm here to prove that the truth matters, no matter how powerful your opponent might be." And with that, she walked away, leaving the world to wonder. Could one woman's courage dismantle an empire built on privilege and exploitation? Would justice prevail, or would the system once again protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable? The stage was set for a trial that would not only determine the fate of Eleanor Daniels, but also challenge the very fabric of what society considered fair and just. Eleanor Daniels' journey to the courtroom had been grueling, marked by relentless struggles that tested her resolve at every turn. A year earlier, she had stumbled upon something that would change her life forever: a series of internal documents at Kirkwood Enterprises, the company she had worked for as a mid-level compliance officer. These documents revealed damning evidence of environmental violations, toxic waste dumped near low-income neighborhoods, mostly affecting Black and minority communities. Worse still, there were records showing that the company had knowingly exploited loopholes in labor laws, subjecting its employees in overseas factories to dangerous working conditions. When Eleanor reported these violations to her superiors, she was met with indifference, followed by hostility. "It's above your pay grade," one executive had sneered, dismissing her concerns as if they were an inconvenience. But Eleanor wasn't deterred. She filed an anonymous whistleblower report with a federal regulatory agency, believing that justice would prevail. What happened next shocked her. Within days, she was called into a meeting where she was berated for disloyalty and accused of leaking sensitive company information. Her access to the company's internal systems was revoked, and within a week, she was fired under the pretense of poor performance. But the nightmare didn't end there. Within a month, Eleanor discovered that she had been blacklisted in the industry. Every application she sent out was met with silence or rejection. Her professional reputation was in ruins, tarnished by rumors spread by Kirkwood's PR machine. She faced mounting bills, sleepless nights, and the crushing weight of knowing that the very system she trusted had turned against her. Still, she refused to give up. She spent weeks poring over the documents she had saved before her termination, connecting the dots and gathering evidence. It was during this time that she realized the scope of the corruption went far beyond what she had initially uncovered. The environmental violations were part of a larger scheme involving fraudulent contracts and kickbacks, all orchestrated at the highest levels of the company. Yet, the deeper she dug, the more isolated she became. Friends distanced themselves, afraid of being associated with her fight. Her family, though supportive, worried for her safety. "You're going up against a billionaire," her sister warned. "Do you really think you can win?" Kirkwood Enterprises, led by Jonathan Kirkwood himself, had a reputation for ruthlessly silencing critics. The billionaire's wealth and influence were unparalleled, and his legal team was notorious for burying opponents in lawsuits until they either gave up or went bankrupt. To them, Eleanor was an ant challenging a giant. Kirkwood's lawyers moved quickly to discredit her. They filed countersuits, accusing her of defamation and theft of company property. They combed through her personal life, looking for anything they could use against her. Her finances were scrutinized, her social media accounts picked apart, and even her medical history was brought into question. The goal was clear: to intimidate her into dropping the case. Eleanor's struggle wasn't just against Kirkwood. It was also against a judicial system steeped in bias. As a Black woman, she knew the odds were stacked against her. Studies had shown that people of color, especially women, faced significant hurdles in seeking justice, from implicit biases among judges and juries to the systemic inequalities that favored the wealthy. The media played a dual role in her ordeal. Some outlets championed her cause, portraying her as a courageous whistleblower standing up to corporate greed. Others, however, sided with Kirkwood, painting her as a bitter former employee seeking revenge. Talk shows and opinion pieces debated her credibility, with one anchor infamously asking, "Is this really about justice, or is it just another attempt to bring down a successful businessman?" Despite the backlash, Eleanor found allies in unexpected places. A grassroots organization dedicated to environmental justice reached out to her, offering support and amplifying her story. Legal experts and activists joined her cause, turning her fight into a broader movement against corporate exploitation. Social media campaigns with hashtags like #StandWithEleanor and #JusticeForWhistleblowers gained traction, rallying people from all walks of life. The tension surrounding the case reached a fever pitch as the trial date approached. Kirkwood's team doubled down, filing motions to have the case dismissed and using every legal maneuver at their disposal to delay proceedings. Each setback was a test of Eleanor's patience and resilience. The biggest wildcard in the case was Judge Richard Sterling. Known for his sharp intellect and unwavering commitment to the law, Sterling had a reputation for being fair but unpredictable. His rulings often defied expectations, and his courtroom demeanor suggested a man who took his role as an arbiter of justice seriously. Yet, Eleanor couldn't ignore the potential for bias. Would Sterling, a white man from an affluent background, truly understand the stakes of her fight? Public opinion added another layer of complexity. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, with supporters holding signs that read, "No one is above the law and justice for the people, not the powerful." At the same time, counter-protesters, many of them organized by groups with ties to Kirkwood, carried banners that declared Eleanor a fraud. As the trial began, the courtroom became a microcosm of the larger societal conflict. The rows of benches were filled with journalists, activists, and curious onlookers. Outside, the chants of protesters echoed through the halls. The atmosphere crackled with tension as Eleanor and her legal team prepared to present their case. For Eleanor, the stakes were not just personal but symbolic. Her fight was about more than exposing corruption. It was about challenging a system that allowed the rich and powerful to operate with impunity. As she sat at the plaintiff's table, clutching a folder of evidence, she couldn't help but wonder, could one woman, armed only with the truth, really stand against the might of a billionaire? And what role would Judge Sterling play in this battle? Would he see through the smokescreen of Kirkwood's defense and recognize the validity of her claims? Or would he succumb to the weight of the billionaire's influence? The answers were unclear, but one thing was certain. Eleanor's courage had already begun to ripple beyond the courtroom, sparking conversations about justice, accountability, and the true meaning of equality. The discovery phase of Eleanor Daniels' case became a battlefield of wits, resilience, and meticulous strategy. Armed with the damning documents she had salvaged before her termination, Eleanor and her legal team, comprised of a scrappy yet brilliant group of attorneys from a non-profit advocacy organization, began to piece together a compelling narrative of corporate corruption and personal vindication. Eleanor's trove of documents was just the beginning. Her lead attorney, Grace Alvarez, a sharp and fearless litigator known for taking on cases that others deemed unwinnable, recognized that they needed more than paper trails. They required witnesses, people willing to stand up to Kirkwood Enterprises. This was no small feat. Many former employees feared retaliation, citing non-disclosure agreements and the company's history of silencing dissenters. Then, a breakthrough came. A former plant manager from one of Kirkwood's overseas operations, a man named Ravi Patel, came forward. His testimony painted a grim picture of dangerous working conditions, falsified safety reports, and bribes to local officials to suppress complaints. "I stayed silent for too long," Ravi admitted in a deposition. "If Eleanor has the courage to fight, so can I." The team also uncovered financial records that corroborated Eleanor's claims. Payments to shell companies, falsified environmental compliance certifications, and suspicious donations to political campaigns. All of it pointed to a deeply entrenched system of fraud and exploitation. With each discovery, Eleanor felt both elated and overwhelmed. The evidence was mounting, but so was the pressure. Jonathan Kirkwood's legal team responded with ferocity, filing motions to dismiss and demanding Eleanor turn over every shred of evidence she had. They argued that the documents she provided were illegally obtained, attempting to have them thrown out. In a bold and calculated move, Grace countered by filing a motion to protect Eleanor under whistleblower protection laws. The courtroom battles over these preliminary issues were intense, with both sides trading sharp legal arguments. Kirkwood's team also played dirty outside the courtroom. A smear campaign began in earnest. News outlets with ties to the billionaire ran stories questioning Eleanor's motives. Anonymous sources claimed she had a history of erratic behavior, while social media bots spread rumors about her credibility. Yet, amidst the chaos, unexpected allies emerged. Journalists from independent outlets started digging into Kirkwood's practices, publishing exposés that validated Eleanor's claims. Environmental organizations and labor rights groups joined the fray, organizing protests and raising funds for her legal battle. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn in her favor. Despite these victories, the path was far from smooth. There were moments when the case seemed on the verge of collapse. One particularly devastating blow came when a key witness, a former executive who had initially agreed to testify, recanted under mysterious circumstances. Eleanor later learned that the witness had received a lucrative, consulting contract from a company linked to Kirkwood. Eleanor's faith in the system wavered. "What if they're right?" she confided to Grace one night. "What if this is too big for me to win?" Grace's response was firm. "The system might be flawed, but the truth has a way of breaking through, Eleanor. You didn't come this far to give up now." Eleanor found strength in small victories. A court ruling allowed her evidence to be admitted, despite Kirkwood's protests. A viral video of her speaking at a rally garnered millions of views, with people around the world expressing their support. For every setback, there was a glimmer of hope that kept her going. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom became a stage for dramatic revelations. Grace meticulously presented the evidence, weaving together the documents, witness testimonies, and expert analysis into a narrative that was impossible to ignore. The jury listened intently as Ravi Patel described the factory fires that had claimed lives, all because Kirkwood Enterprises had cut corners on safety. One of the most shocking moments came when Grace unveiled an internal memo signed by Jonathan Kirkwood himself, instructing executives to make the problem go away after an employee union had raised concerns about toxic waste. The memo was a smoking gun, directly implicating the billionaire in the cover-up. Throughout the proceedings, Eleanor watched Judge Richard Sterling closely. His face was inscrutable, giving no indication of his leanings. However, his pointed questions to both sides suggested a deep engagement with the case. At one point, he challenged Kirkwood's lead attorney on the ethics of suppressing whistleblowers, a moment that left the courtroom buzzing. Outside the courtroom, the public narrative surrounding the case evolved. Media outlets began to highlight the systemic issues Eleanor's fight represented. Activists framed the trial as a watershed moment for accountability in corporate America, likening Eleanor to David facing Goliath. Eleanor's legal team worked tirelessly, often pulling all-nighters to prepare for the next day's proceedings. Grace, despite her stoic demeanor, shared a quiet moment with Eleanor, admitting, "This case isn't just about winning. It's about making them realize they can't crush people like you without consequences." Eleanor found herself inspired by the support she received from strangers. Letters poured in from people who shared their own stories of fighting against injustice. Each message strengthened her resolve, reminding her that she was not alone in this fight. As the trial neared its conclusion, Judge Sterling's role became increasingly pivotal. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor, he began asking probing questions that cut through Kirkwood's obfuscations. At one point, he demanded clarity on why certain documents had been withheld during discovery, a move that visibly rattled Kirkwood's team. Sterling also showed an unexpected understanding of the broader implications of the case. In one memorable moment, he remarked, "This isn't just about one company or one woman. This is about whether our legal system can stand up to unchecked power." His words reverberated through the courtroom, signaling that he saw the case as more than just a legal battle. It was a moral reckoning. With each passing day, the tension in the courtroom grew. The final weeks of the trial saw both sides delivering their closing arguments. Kirkwood's attorneys painted Eleanor as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind, while Grace delivered a passionate plea for justice, urging the jury to see the case for what it truly was, a fight for accountability and integrity. The outcome was uncertain, But one thing was clear. Eleanor had done everything in her power to bring the truth to light. As the jury prepared to deliberate, the world held its breath, waiting to see whether justice would prevail. The courtroom was silent as Judge Richard Sterling prepared to deliver his verdict. Spectators, reporters, and activists packed the room, their eyes locked on the bench. The air was thick with anticipation. Eleanor sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands trembling slightly as Grace whispered a final word of encouragement. Across the aisle, Jonathan Kirkwood sat with his high-powered legal team, his face carefully blank but his posture tense. Judge Sterling began by summarizing the case, his tone measured but firm. This trial has brought to light grave allegations of corporate misconduct, environmental harm, and attempts to silence those who dare to expose the truth, he stated. His gaze swept across the room, pausing briefly on Eleanor, whose eyes brimmed with unshed tears. Then came the ruling. After careful consideration of the evidence, witness testimonies, and legal arguments presented, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Eleanor Daniels. The words seemed to echo in the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by muffled cheers and applause. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth as Grace gripped her shoulder, a rare smile breaking through her usual stoic demeanor. On the other side of the courtroom, Kirkwood's jaw tightened, his legal team scrambling to contain the fallout. But Judge Sterling wasn't done. Furthermore, this court finds that Kirkwood Enterprises engaged in systemic malfeasance, including environmental violations, labor law infractions, and retaliation against whistleblowers. As such, the company is ordered to pay $50 million in damages to the plaintiff and an additional $200 million in punitive damages to be allocated toward environmental and labor reparations. The collective shock was palpable. This was not just a victory, it was a reckoning. What truly stunned the world was the rationale behind Sterling's decision. In his closing remarks, he addressed the broader implications of the case. This ruling is not merely about compensating one individual for the harm done to her. It is a statement that the powerful cannot operate above the law, that the voices of the marginalized cannot be silenced indefinitely, and that justice must be blind to wealth and privilege. He went further, condemning the tactics used by Kirkwood Enterprises to intimidate and suppress whistleblowers. If corporations are to thrive in a fair and equitable society, they must be held accountable for their actions, not just in the court of public opinion, but within the rule of law. His words struck a chord with millions watching the live broadcast. For many, it was a rare moment of faith restored in the judicial system, proof that even in a flawed system, justice could prevail. In the days following the verdict, Eleanor became a symbol of resilience and courage. She had entered the courtroom as a former employee fighting for her survival. Now, she was a celebrated hero. News outlets around the world hailed her as the woman who brought a billionaire to his knees. For Eleanor, the transformation was deeply personal. The financial settlement provided her with a security she had never known, but the victory meant more than money. It was validation of her truth, a vindication of her struggle, and a testament to the power of perseverance. "I didn't just fight for myself," Eleanor said during a televised interview. "I fought for everyone who has ever been told to stay silent, who has been made to feel small or powerless. This isn't just my victory, it's ours." The case sent shockwaves through corporate boardrooms, legal circles, and public consciousness. Kirkwood Enterprises' stock plummeted, and the company faced mounting pressure to reform its practices. The Environmental Protection Agency reopened investigations into the company's past violations, while labor unions used the case as a rallying cry for stronger worker protections. Other whistleblowers, inspired by Eleanor's bravery, began coming forward with their own stories. The case set a legal precedent, strengthening protections for individuals who exposed corporate wrongdoing. Activist groups lobbied for new legislation, and within months, Congress passed the Whistleblower Empowerment Act, which expanded legal safeguards and increased penalties for retaliation. The cultural impact was just as profound. Eleanor's story sparked conversations about race, gender, and power dynamics in the workplace. For Black women in particular, her victory was a source of pride and inspiration. "She showed the world that we can stand up to anyone, no matter how powerful," said one supporter at a rally. Eleanor's victory was not without its complexities. While the financial settlement allowed her to rebuild her life, the journey had taken an emotional toll. The stress of the trial, the public scrutiny, and the smear campaigns left scars that would take time to heal. Yet, she found solace in her newfound purpose. Eleanor used a portion of her settlement to establish the Daniels Foundation for Justice, an organization dedicated to supporting whistleblowers, advocating for corporate accountability, and providing legal aid to marginalized communities. "I can't change what happened to me," she said during the foundation's launch, "but I can make sure that others don't have to fight alone." The impact of the case extended far beyond Eleanor's personal transformation. It became a turning point in the fight for justice and equality. Corporations began reassessing their practices, knowing they could no longer rely on wealth and power to shield them from accountability. Judge Sterling's ruling was cited in legal cases and academic papers as a landmark decision, a symbol of the judiciary's potential to challenge systemic inequality. Public opinion shifted, with greater awareness of the need to protect those who dared to speak truth to power. As for Eleanor, she remained grounded. Though her life had changed in ways she never imagined, she stayed true to the values that had carried her through the toughest of times: integrity, courage, and an unshakable belief in the power of justice. In the years that followed, Eleanor's story became a part of history. Students studied her case in law schools, activists invoked her name in rallies, and authors wrote books about the trial that redefined accountability. But for Eleanor, the greatest legacy was the lives she touched, the people who found their own courage because of her fight. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," she said in one of her final interviews. "It's standing up, even when fear tries to stop you. And if I can do it, so can you." The court case of Eleanor Daniels versus Kirkwood Enterprises didn't just end with a ruling. It ignited a movement. For years, the legal and corporate systems had operated under a veil of untouchability, especially for those who wielded immense wealth and influence. But Eleanor's determination cracked that facade. Her victory became a benchmark, not only for whistleblowers, but for anyone challenging institutional power. Lawmakers, legal professionals, and activists frequently cited the case as an example of what could happen when individuals stood united against oppression. The media continued to cover Eleanor's journey, not just as a court battle, but as the embodiment of resilience and moral conviction. One law professor remarked, "The Daniels case redefined accountability in the corporate world. It showed that justice can prevail even in the face of power disparities, but more importantly, it underscored the need for systemic reform to ensure such victories are not rare." Eleanor herself experienced a profound transformation. For years, she had lived in the shadows, silenced by fear and uncertainty. The victory brought her into the light, not just as a plaintiff, but as a leader, advocate, and role model. As she reflected on her journey, Eleanor often spoke about how it wasn't just her fight. "This case was bigger than me," she said during a keynote speech at a human rights conference. "It was about giving a voice to the voiceless. It was about reminding the world that truth and courage are stronger than fear and intimidation." She became an icon for Black women across the globe, a symbol of unrelenting strength in the face of systemic inequality. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like #JusticeForEleanor and #CourageWins, sparking dialogues about race, gender, and power. With the settlement money and newfound platform, Eleanor launched the Daniels Foundation for Justice. The organization quickly became a leading advocate for whistleblowers, offering legal aid and emotional support to those taking on powerful institutions. The foundation's work also extended to educating marginalized communities about their rights and empowering them to demand justice. "Our mission is simple," Eleanor said at the foundation's opening ceremony, "to ensure that no one stands alone in the fight for what's right." The foundation's impact was immediate and far-reaching. Within its first year, it had assisted dozens of whistleblowers, many of whom credited Eleanor's story with giving them the courage to speak out. Judge Richard Sterling, whose impartial and groundbreaking ruling became the centerpiece of the case, also faced public scrutiny and acclaim. His decision was hailed as a turning point for the judiciary, a moment where the scales of justice balanced against systemic inequality. In interviews following the case, Judge Sterling reflected on his role. "Justice is not about siding with the powerful or the powerless. It's about upholding the principles that define us as a society." In Eleanor Daniels, "I saw someone who reminded us all why those principles matter." His ruling inspired other judges to take bolder stances in cases involving marginalized individuals. Legal analysts noted an uptick in rulings that challenged corporate impunity and strengthened protections for workers and whistleblowers. Eleanor's case didn't just impact the courtroom, it transformed societal expectations. Public discourse around corporate accountability, racial justice, and gender equity surged. Educational programs began integrating the Daniels case into their curricula, emphasizing the intersection of law, ethics, and activism. Corporations, too, began reassessing their policies, spurred by fear of similar repercussions. Many implemented stricter oversight protocols and created channels for employee grievances, while others faced mounting pressure from shareholders to prioritize ethical practices. In the broader culture, Eleanor's story inspired countless individuals to confront their own fears. Support groups and online communities emerged, dedicated to amplifying the voices of those challenging power structures. Though Eleanor's victory brought her acclaim, it also brought introspection. The battle had been grueling, leaving her emotionally and physically drained. But as she rebuilt her life, she discovered a renewed sense of purpose. Eleanor returned to school, earning a degree in environmental law to further her advocacy work. She often said that the case had taught her the importance of knowledge and preparation. The fight doesn't end with one victory, she explained. It's a continuous struggle to ensure that justice is accessible to all. Her personal life also blossomed. Reconnecting with her roots, she spent more time with family and friends who had been her steadfast support system. She found joy in mentoring young women, encouraging them to embrace their strength and potential. Eleanor's story resonated because it was a reminder that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things. In her speeches, she urged others to find their voice and use it, no matter how daunting the challenge. Change doesn't happen overnight, she said during a TED Talk that garnered millions of views. But it starts with one step, one voice, one act of courage. You don't have to take on the world alone. Just take the first step, and others will follow. Her message was clear. The fight for justice is ongoing, and it requires collective effort. She called on individuals, communities, and institutions to hold themselves and others accountable. While Eleanor's case marked a turning point, it also illuminated how much work remained. Systemic inequality still existed, and the fight against entrenched power structures continued. But Eleanor's victory offered a blueprint, a way forward for those willing to stand up for what's right. As the years passed, her legacy grew. Documentaries, books, and films chronicled her story, ensuring that future generations would remember the Black woman who dared to take on a billionaire and won. In the final chapter of her memoir, Eleanor wrote, "Justice is not a destination, it's a journey. And though the road is long and often lonely, it is a path worth taking. Because every step forward brings us closer to a world where fairness isn't a privilege, it's a right." Eleanor Daniels' fight was a testament to the power of courage and resilience. Her story inspired countless others to believe in the possibility of change and reminded the world that no amount of power or wealth could silence the truth. And so, the tale of Eleanor Daniels continues, not as a closed chapter but as an ongoing inspiration for all who seek justice in an often unjust world.